Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair with a brief note about today's episode as we continue our look at Harvester. So this episode ran a little long, and so I've decided rather than having like one big long episode for our second part on Harvester, I'm going to split it into two. So in the first half, it'll be me, Kate, Andy, no Alfred this time, and we'll be looking at Harvester's production and some of its pre-release reporting. And then the second half, which will drop on April the 2nd, we'll be looking into the game's promotion, its reception, and its legacy, or lack thereof. So, without further ado, here's the episode.
One made There Will Be Blood, one made all the Resident Evil movies.
Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
I'm Andy Hunter, a longtime fan of all things Nintendo.
I'm Kate, and I'm taking a break from my shift at the meat plant to be here.
All right, we are back for our next part at looking at this strange little PC game called Harvester. As we learned last time, Harvester was the brainchild of Gilbert P. Austin, who developed Harvester as a kind of artistic expression about concerns over violent media and creating the most over-the-top, violent, and explicit game he could make to make a statement about people being concerned about what media was doing to people. We also learned how developer Future Vision introduced Harvester to the world during the Winter 1994 Consumer Electronics Show, and its presentation of both surprising gore and impressive looking for the time 3D animation got some people over the course of 1994 thinking about what a game like Harvester could mean for the future of computer gaming, with some people being concerned that Harvester would be a harbinger for games that are going to be more explicitly violent, ones that might raise moral concern. However, as the great Shigeru Miyamoto probably once said, I don't know, I don't fact check anything on this show. If you want a video game controversy, first you need to make a video game. And as it turns out in Harvester's case, that proved to be quite a difficult task. So why don't we take a look at the game's production? Reportedly, Future Vision first did all the live action filming, including shooting the cutscenes and capturing the actors' movements for digitized sprites before designing the game. There is a video that's around that was added as a bonus when this was put on GOG of footage of them making this game. So I'm going to bring that up and share the screen so you can take a look at that. So on the right-hand side, this is Gil Austin with the hat. On the left-hand side is Kevin Obregon, who was his first unit director, who also plays the Sergeant-at-Arms. So you can see them doing all their scenes on this really big green screen. Actors describe things like, you would have a car would just be a big green screen block. It's basically the way they make Marvel movies now. When they did their walking animations, they did it on a treadmill. A lot of animation for Steve, for example, involved holding different types of weapons. So you can see here Kirk Kissler, who is the actor who played the character model for Steve, trying some of the different animations.
Is that the actor who played Stephanie demonstrating for him what he's supposed to be doing?
I don't think so. Here's Gil Austin helping out with a scene. So you can see a person getting makeup put on, prosthetic makeup. There's a scene where a woman is being eaten by children. And so Gil Austin here is acting what he thinks with the bites would happen. And it shows a little bit of animators working on developing this game. So you can see some of them making environments and things like that. According to Austin, Harvester's filming took place during what he described as, quote, one long, hellishly hot summer, end quote, in 1994. Shooting took place on a massive green screen set at AMS Production Group / AMS Pictures in North Dallas. Later promotional material put out by Merit Studios boasted the game involved over 100 actors. Aarno Malin revealed on the Harvester show that the team employed a Dallas-based talent agency called Peggy Taylor Talent. However, their level of acting experience varied wildly. Take, for example, the game's lead, Kirk Kissler, who played the role of Steve. Kissler explained to Malin in an interview published in 2015 that when he got the role of Steve, he was a graphic artist and aspiring 3D animator who happened to play in the same band as Kevin Obregon, the first unit director, and his only acting experience at that point consisted of a few high school plays. Meanwhile, Lisa Cangelosi, who played Steve's romantic interest Stephanie, was at the time a singer, dancer, and aspiring actress, and prior to Harvester, she was a singer and dancer in the traveling act Up With People, and played a role in a 1994 Western called Dust to Dust, a movie that also had Willie Nelson in it. As an aside, the only IMDb review for this movie comes from a person who allegedly worked on it and wrote of Dust to Dust, quote, "It wasn't the worst film I ever worked on," end quote, on the way to giving it 1 out of 10 stars.
What did Willie Nelson have to say about it?
I'm reminded of a joke from the second Major League movie where one of the players was in like a really dumb action movie, and they have the baseball announcers talking as he's going up to bat. And he says, I went to try to see his film. However, it was only out for 2 hours, although I heard from people it was in focus. I think that's what's going on with Dust to Dust. Neither Cangelosi nor Kistler's dialogue ended up in the final game. In fact, Cangelosi talked specifically that she did not record dialogue so much as they had her filming her mouth in different movements so that they could dub over her voice with another actor. So like a lot of like, enunciating different types of sounds so that they could voice over that with a different actor. I don't know if that was also going to be the case for Kirk Kistler, but neither Cangelosi nor Kistler's dialogue ended the final game. A voice actor named Ryan Wickerham voiced both Steve and the Sergeant at Arms, and Stephanie's voice actor, as far as we know, is uncredited. Several of the Future Vision team also took roles both in front of and behind the camera. A number of the character models that were in the game some of them were Future Vision employees. As I mentioned before, Kevin Obregon was Harvester's first unit director. He designed the game's logo. He helped punch up Austin's script and acted but did not voice the Sergeant at Arms. He also played one of the engineers in the ending where Steve chooses to become a serial killer, or at least masked so you don't know it's him. However, chances are good that Austin was the one wearing the most hats in Harvester's creation. In addition to the game's lead writer, he directed the audio and video clips. He lent his likeness to at least one character. For Harvester fans, that's Mr. Moynihan, the Mortician, and designed the game's box art. All this while only working as a contractor for Future Vision. As he later recalled to Aarno Malin, quote, because I cared about the game and wanted to stay true to my vision, I essentially donated my time in directing the video shoot and all of the audio sessions after I had already met my contractual obligations. I basically did that work for free, end quote. And it's an experience I can imagine anyone who's done creative work and ended up getting paid in exposure will find relatable. I imagine some of that is also like, this for him was his baby. This was his first time getting full creative control of a project.
Yeah, and making that big point about Roadrunner cartoons.
Some of us convey our personal bugbears through various things. Mine is this show, so I guess I can relate on that.
Well, and look how many hats you wear on this show. So you're basically
What's that children's book where the guy, he just has a whole bunch of hats? I think it's called like Caps for Sale.
caps for sale. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that. He's the Caps for Sale guy. After recording and filming Wrapped, Austin moved on to other projects, leaving it up to Future Vision to work their technical wizardry and bring Harvester to market.
Oh boy.
Yeah, oh boy. No, additional oh boy. Listen to how long they had to work on this. Merritt promised that this game would come out in August of 1994. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that summer is June, and let's say they film this over a couple of weeks in June 1994. That basically gives them 2 months to get this thing to market. That's a big ask.
Impossible.
Yeah, so this is, to put it mildly, a daunting task, given the small team now had to integrate all of Austin's footage and devise a coherent creative vision for the game, which compared to the things we heard about in the May-June 1994 PC Gamer article and the teaser trailer that we saw from January 1994, was certainly an ambitious proposition. Compare what we've seen so far and what we've heard so far to what the game looks like, and it doesn't look like any of that. On top of that, Merritt also disclosed to PC Gamer that Harvester was only about 35% done at the time of that article. And this is a May-June 1994 issue. And you always assume with magazines they were a little bit ahead. So like 35% done. And this was on top of the fact that Future Vision was on the hook to put out 3 more games that year for Merritt. Remember, they made that big multi-million-dollar promise. That's a lot. This team was very small. I think I read somewhere their team was no more than about 15 people. So all of this is someone overpromised somewhere. I don't know what happened. Somebody made somebody a promise that they could not keep. Or someone didn't listen to what their realistic options were and said, Merritt's like, I need 10 to 14 games out. Chop, chop. I don't care how you do them. I've never worked in game design, but I've worked in project management, and I can see this. You can see the red flags of this project.
It kind of reminds me of, I was trying to look up the exact details. I don't have the numbers directly in front of me, but like the movie Event Horizon, if it feels a little bit rushed or a little bit hacked together, and I love that movie, and I know, Kevin, you do too. So there was one schedule that had been set up for it, and then the James Cameron movie Titanic was slated to come out in summer of 1997. And Cameron, because he had pull, told the studio, I mean, I'm assuming it's because he had pull. He just was able to tell the studio the movie's not going to be ready before Christmas. And so then there was this open time slot for the summer that the studio wanted to put something out there to make money. And so they just told was Paul Thomas Anderson, you got to do it. And they shaved a pretty dramatic amount of time off of the filming and editing and everything that he thought he had. And so, like, we are put into a lose-lose situation. There's no way we're going to make the movie we want to make, or even necessarily a particularly good movie, because you've taken so much time off of us. And it's not the exact same thing what you're talking about here, but it sounds quite similar when it's like we have to crank out how many games in this short time frame. And how big was the studio?
It wasn't very big. I want to say it's fewer than 15 people who
And
are
do
in
you
the
happen to
studio.
know what their experience, like what sort of games, if any, they had made prior to these?
I could be wrong, but as far as I know, this was the first game Future Vision had put out. Some of the guys worked in tech. I don't know a lot of the backgrounds of a lot of them. I know that the guy who founded this studio, Lee Jacobson, had worked at another tech company in Dallas, and Kevin Obregon joined him when he made his studio. But I don't know, as a team, I don't think they have very much dev experience.
Well, I'm reminded of the game Hello Neighbor, the studio that made it. I believe that they were mostly known for having made mobile games prior to that. And not that mobile games are super simple or anything, but it's like it's a whole different ball of wax from what the goal was with Hello Neighbor.
Yeah, and I can see that. One brief correction, Paul W.S. Anderson. I mix him up too. I always
Yeah,
mix them up.
yeah. One made There Will Be Blood, one made all the Resident Evil movies. It's
Yes. Paul W.S. Anderson is a guilty pleasure of mine. I love Event Horizon. I like the Mortal Kombat movie. I like his Monster Hunter movie. I wish it was longer. It ends at the wrong time, in my opinion, but we may do as our next
Well, maybe
commentary.
they'll make a sequel where the Monster Hunter fights his way back from hell, like the
Like Gladiator
Gladiator
2.
we never got.
Wait, I'd never heard of a Monster Hunter movie having come out. Was that a long time ago?
It came out in 2020. It starred Mila Jovovich, and it makes sense because
Oh,
she's married to Paul W.S. Anderson. It's okay. It's okay. It kind of takes a while to get going. And it sets up like this really epic fight. I believe they're going to fight a Rathalos, and then the movie stops, and you don't get to see them fight a Rathalos. So it is a movie that writes a check that it didn't cash. It hoped for a sequel that it's probably never going to get. But we may watch it, as a bunch of Monster Hunter heads that we are. Anyway, this is an ambitious project. They're asking a lot project-wise. Mirror's 2 is asking a lot of Future Vision for this kind of turnaround. And it's also worth mentioning that the kind of ambitious integration of computer-generated graphics, digitized live actors, and FMV cutscenes that Future Vision attempted with Harvester was a tall order even for the largest and most well-funded of PC game companies. Take, for example, Phantasmagoria, which was in development around the same time as Harvester. Does anyone have, I know you have experience. Do you want to share any of your experiences, your thoughts on Phantasmagoria, Kate?
Oh yeah, I mean it's another FMV game, although comparing it to Harvester, and I did go back and replay some of it after watching that Harvester playthrough with the Game Grumps. It also utilizes live action actors and cutscenes and such, but it's just the gameplay is a lot smoother and a lot more compelling. Harvester has this weird thing, well, it's not weird, but like has this thing where they have just sort of talking heads, like the avatars appear next to dialogue that is read out to you while you're also reading it. It's kind of just slow and plotting. I feel like Phantasmagoria establishes more of an atmosphere of real dread. There's some very uncomfortable stuff around the marriage, not even just the thing that probably everyone thinks I'm referring to, but just in general, the way that the main character and her husband's relationship deteriorates over time. It has a real sense of place in my mind, and then it does go there in terms of the gore. Like when you get to the gore, and you don't get to the gore right away, but when you do, it does get pretty bonkers pretty quickly, but it in a way that feels like it makes sense within the game. It's easy to compare these two games, Phantasmagoria and Harvester. They have a lot in common, both in terms of the medium and also the idea that they are both trying to push the envelope. And I think Phantasmagoria was too, but I feel like Phantasmagoria was telling a story more than Harvester. Like there's no real story in Harvester. It doesn't make any sense. It seems like Harvester exists purely to create and promote scandal and the idea that, here is a game that is very violent and that's all we're trying to do. And honestly, the end result is something that's so nonsensical and incoherent. It's like better off to just kind of ignore it and go play something else.
It does, and I think those are fair observations. Yeah, Phantasmagoria is, again, we watched a Let's Play video, and I had always kind of heard of Phantasmagoria, never played it. It's quite impressive, the way it presents its story. It's FMV, but it's all seamlessly integrated. It is interactive in a way that, like, an earlier FMV game like Night Trap wasn't, where Night Trap was basically a game attached to a bunch of film clips, whereas Phantasmagoria seems like it's seamlessly integrated. Seamlessly integrated for, 1993, but, like, it is very impressive. And like, yeah, if you put the game side by side, it blows Harvester out of the water. And like you said, Kate, Phantasmagoria does have a lot of similarities to Harvester. They're both horror-themed CD-ROM games. They integrate live-action cutscenes and digitized actors, and they both try to push the envelope in terms of sex and violence. Phantasmagoria was also a bit of a trouble production, too. It originally had an $800,000 budget, which eventually, by the time the game was finished, ballooned to $4.5 million. So this went way over budget. It was delayed numerous times. It was initially supposed to come out in 1993, and it eventually came out in 1995. And Sierra, with like Origin and id, are kind of like some of the biggest players in the PC gaming market. So they're like, if the big budget people were having trouble with this, what does that bode for a small studio like Future Vision? And to their credit, someone either at Merit or Future Vision realized that they were getting in over their heads and had the presence of mind to push back Harvester's release. Some promo material related to the game promised a late 1994 release instead of the summer, which was then also pushed back to summer 1995. And I've heard accounts that say either May or June of 1995 is what they pushed it to. In anticipation of its new release, Merit and Future Vision went back on the press junket and received some positive attention in the Texas press in the spring or early summer of 1995. And this kind of makes sense because in the early 1990s, Texas was kind of a haven for PC gaming. A number of big studios were based out of Texas. For example, you had Origin Systems, which was based in Austin. You had Apogee/3D Realms, the guys who made like Duke Nukem. And of course, id. id was based in Mesquite. For example, Texas Monthly, in between their umpteenth article about all the luxury cars parked outside of id Software's Mesquite, Texas headquarters, and I've read a couple of them researching Doom, they ran an article on Harvester in the March 1995 issue. And writer Gregory Curtis wrote after seeing footage from Harvester that the game's content disturbed him, literally calling it, quote, sickeningly violent and depraved, end quote. However, Curtis also couched his disgust for the game's presentation, writing he felt Harvester represented a new turn for computer games away from purely entertainment and more towards art. Curtis favorably compared Harvester to a notable signpost in the history of film, and as an aside, I kind of imagine Future Vision and Merit Software wish he picked a different movie to compare it with, because he compared it to The Birth of a Nation.
In what way?
I see Andy's reaction. You know what this movie is.
In what way?
What do you all know about this movie?
So for listeners, Birth of the Nation is a movie, I think silent movie that I think is fictionalized, but a glorification of the founding of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yep.
There are white actors who appear in blackface as villainous black people. I know there's a scene of a woman being about to be attacked by a black man, again, a white actor in blackface, where she throws herself off a cliff rather than be attacked by this black man. It's a terrible film and not one to be compared to. There's no way to compare yourself to it favorably, in my opinion.
Yeah, so released in 1915 and directed by D.W. Griffith, The Birth of a Nation is generally regarded among film historians for two things. Firstly, it was an early pioneer in various technical innovations in film, including set design, production, and visual story. Secondly, it's racist as fuck, with its story presenting a heroic depiction of the founding of the Ku Klux Klan. Yeah, it's rough. That's a rough comparison. Here's how Curtis compared the two. Quote, despite the gore, there are glimmers of something original here, of bending technology into an entirely new art. I don't mean using computers to compose music or draw, although computers do both very well, because there were musical scores and paintings for centuries before there were computers. I mean an art that could not exist independent of computers. Computers are tools, but are they only tools, with no more artistic potential than an adding machine or a leaf blower? Or are they also a medium like film or paint? Everyone senses that they are a medium, but for creating what? Right now, computer games are as close as anyone has come to answering that question. Computer games are interactive. Players make choices. The computer whirs, and the player must make more choices. Can a game be created in which the player must make choices that have emotional, aesthetic, and moral meaning? That would be how a computer game could become a new art, and Harvester, in its violent, depraved way, does exactly that. Harvester could be to computer games what The Birth of a Nation was to movies. That 1950 masterpiece, okay, settle down a little bit, 1950 masterpiece, was the first great movie epic ever made, the first to understand how a movie camera could create a unique art, and in its glorification of the Ku Klux Klan, it too was sickeningly violent and depraved, end quote. So yeah, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I have not actually seen Birth of a Nation, so I
Yeah, me either.
so I can't actually speak to the filmmaking prowess of it, beyond its questionable content. So yeah, so maybe comparing its cinematic achievements to a game's groundbreaking achievements might be like a worthy, good compliment. but I don't know enough to
Well,
speak to that.
is it this thing where it's like these are FMV games with real actors and footage that feels like it could be from a movie or a TV show that is now the standard of comparison? How does this compare to a movie? Like I think about one of the criticisms that I read for Phantasmagoria 2 in a review of it that said something along the lines of like, this is a pretty edgy game, it's pretty good, etc. But if you're looking for something like really gory and out there, and you're gonna go to Blockbuster and pick anything up off the shelf in the horror section, and it's gonna be more intense than this. And more than that direct observation is more like, is it just there's the temptation to compare these two films more than anything within their medium because of the nature of the FMV game?
There is a constant litany through a bunch of observers from I'd say probably in the late 1980s through the 2000s to understand if video games are going to be art, they always compare them to film. The film is like the standard of comparison as a visual media. And it could be argued that they are not very fair comparisons because one of them is a lot more interactive. And like using your example, Kate, like you can rent a cheap B horror movie and it's over in 90 minutes and you don't have to do anything about it and the outcome is exactly the same. Whereas like a game, you have to do something to progress. As we talked about before with Harvester, is like to see to the end, you have to play by its rules. You have to do the things in the narrative to do it. And there is, I think, a lot of instinct among a lot of writers to they're trying to find a framework by which they can examine games as art, and the only way they can think of doing it is comparing it to film. So I think that's what they're doing here, and I think it's a lot of the question about, I'm trying to take this as the, like, Birth of a Nation notwithstanding. I wasn't asking anybody to analyze Birth of a Nation here. More than they're comparing it as this, like, this film that, like, had a lot of technical innovation, but also it tells a very horrible story that literally did inspire the creation of the second Ku Klux Klan in the 1910s. So that's a whole nother thing. I don't think it's fair to compare Harvester that way, regardless of what Harvester is saying. So this thing pleads a little bit of ignorance for the writer in the context and what he's trying to actually convey. I think the bigger question is like the question about like how computers can be used for art. There's a very famous advertisement that Electronic Arts put out in the mid 1980s that opened, "Can a computer make you cry?" And so talking about this idea of computer games and gaming as a way of conveying artistic expression. The other part, going to your question, Kate, is like FMV lended pretty well to that because, again, these were live actors doing live scenes and basically applying the principles of film on top of a game. And all this is to say, I think that it was very complicated to talk about games this way, especially given how much the medium had moved technologically and how much they were able to start telling stories like the way movies would. And so a lot of the people's frame of reference was to talk about them through movies, is the way I think of this. If we think about this as if we take this as in its best possible light, I think that's that. So on one level, again, I would cringe at the idea of something I created compared to Birth of a Nation, even if you're talking about technical achievement, because of all the other baggage that goes with. And again, I can imagine the people at Future Vision cringing a little bit seeing that article. But Harvester was also picked up at a bunch of other Texas-based publications. So Kate showed at the beginning of this that picture from the Met. The Met is a really small Dallas-based weekly, which picked up Harvester as a cover article for their June 22nd to 29th, 1995 issue. Kevin Obregon also told Aarno Malin that he met with a writer for the horror magazine Fangoria to talk about Harvester. And I did some digging. Fangoria does have an archive and does have some full scans of magazines from the time. Unfortunately, I could not find a Fango that covered Harvester. People know of one. Send me a citation, send me a scan. scandalscanspodcast@gmail.com. So it's possible that it got a little bit of press at this time. And Birth of a Nation comparisons notwithstanding, all that sounds pretty promising. And, reports assured readers Harvester would be out by the summer of 1995, anywhere between May and June, depending on the reports. However, it turns out making games is hard. I don't think any of us did tell it to anybody.
No.
I know I'm going out on a limb. Super hot take here at Scandalous Games. Making video games is difficult. And as it turns out, Future Vision needed even more time to get Harvester retail ready, forcing Merit to push its release again. And these mounting delays started putting both Future Vision and Merit into an increasingly precarious position. Because, the longer you wait to put out a game, the greater pressure you're going to face from the competition. Because what looked cutting edge in 1994 is going to look really dated and stale a couple of years later. And again, think about the leap between like a Super NES game in like 94 versus like an N64 game in 96. And like, this is the time when the industry graphics-wise is growing by leaps and bounds. And Moore's Law says you're going to have double the processor power roughly every 2 years. On top of it, the longer the development time, the higher the cost, and then the higher the pressure of the final product to sell to offset those costs. And so the longer you work on a game, the more you're going to have to reckon with a pair of impossible options. Either you soldier on with what you have and risk your game looking behind the times and risk losing tons of money in sales to more advanced games, or you scrap what you got and start from scratch, pour more money into the project on top of the money you've already wasted, and hope your new iteration is out before the next big technical leap in gaming. This is a scenario called Duke Nukem Forever's Wager, and I think the guys who made that over 3D Realms can relate to some of the pressures, although at least to Future Vision's credit, they did not take 20 years to make this game. Either way, the longer you wait, the more expensive the project is going to be, and the greater pressure you put in the game to recoup the losses at retail. And given Future Vision's a small studio, one protracted development cycle like this could potentially sink the whole company. Like, the stakes are real high for all of this. And with that in mind, let's skip ahead a whole year later to September of 1996. And after a full 2.5 years since the initial teaser trailer at CES, a veritable eternity in early 90s PC gaming terms, Harvester finally shipped to retailers. The date is kind of murky in exactly when it did it. Harvester's website says September the 23rd. Some press releases say September the 25th. So it's not really clear exactly when it goes, but sometime late September. In the interim, Future Vision rebranded as DigiFX Software, spelled DIGIFX, but pronounced DigiFX. And I got that from some promotional videos they put out in the mid-90s. Dustin Nulf, one of Harvester's programmers, recalled to Aarno Malin in an interview Malin published in 2012 that the name change was a way for the company to distance itself from their rocky history of getting this game to market. It's like, we're rebranding. That was Future Vision's problem. DigiFX hasn't missed a deadline yet. The game attracted an M for Mature rating in the United States for realistic blood and gore and realistic violence. Meanwhile, its content attracted some international pushback. The British Board of Film Classification required 2 scenes to be cut before it could be released in the UK. Both of them involving a scene where...
Wait. Can we try to guess what the scenes are?
Sure.
Give us some options.
So I'll put it in a broad category because I'm not very creative. Do you think it was a violence scene? Do we think it was a sex scene? Or do we think it was something else?
I think it was a meatpacking scene because I am really not remembering much about this.
I'm going to say it's a sex scene.
It's actually a violence scene.
Oh.
There's a scene late in the game where you encounter a mother who's being eaten by her children. And there were 2 cut scenes of the children literally taking bites out of her with like blood in their face and everything, which the British board didn't like. And so those were cut out of the game.
Wait a second, though. I thought the entire point of this game was to make an artistic expression rebelling against the idea of censoring an artistic vision. And yet here they did cut parts of this game in order to make it to market. I mean, has the Roadrunner taught us nothing?
It might be argued that Gilbert Austin's vision was that, but I feel like at this point, after 2.5 years of waiting for this game to come out, Merit Software is interested in one thing: this thing's selling. Because they were a publicly traded company at this point, so at the end of every year, they have to talk to their stockholders. And for at least 2 years of stockholder reports, they have to explain why they're not making money because their games aren't coming out. So I can see them at this point. It's like, this damn creative vision. We need to make some cash on this to just keep the lights on. The repo guys are seizing our computers. We got to make something.
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, so they needed those 2 scenes cut in the UK. Germany, meanwhile, well known for tight restrictions on video game content, refused to carry the game at all. So it was not carried in Germany. It wasn't carried in a lot of other markets either. For example, it was not carried in Australia.
Let's ask about Australia, yeah.
Fun fact about the game's international release, callback to a previous episode, it was published overseas by Virgin Interactive Entertainment, the same studio owned by TV's Aaron Spelling of Beverly Hills 90210 and Melrose Place fame, who also tried to put out Thrill Kill, that BDSM-themed fighting game intended for the PS1 that ended up never getting released. And for more on that, check out our previous episode.
Yeah, they doubled back and they made BDSM-themed electronic jigsaw puzzles.
Harvard Bonin took notes from Harvester. Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin back in the editor's chair. And as I said at the beginning, we split this episode into 2 parts, with the second one dropping on April the 2nd. So we'll wrap up here. So I hope you'll join me and Kate and Andy next time as we look into how Merit attempted to market Harvester, its reception, and why we don't talk about this game very much. How did a game so tailor-made for controversy kind of leave no impact? Why is it not like, Night Trap or Postal in the popular memory of controversial video game games of the 1990s. And so that's what we'll take a look at next time. And so that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Seek. I seek knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY-NC SA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and speaking for Andy Hunter and Kate Lynch, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.